give people an idea of what it was like to be on a ship that was that small for that long. What was it like to be on that?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is crowded. The thing that becomes a nuisance is that you become so familiar with everything about everybody that it's tempting to say something that you might regret later.
Were you prepared? Were you prepared for the length of time you would be gone and for the conditions that you were under?
Not at all. Not at all. I had, for a long time, wanted to join the Canadian Mounted Police. And so I went through training as a sub-constable when you start when you're 18. And I had graduated from the school, but in the interim I had gone to another school and I was pretty adept at shorthand and typing. And so
Can you put it on the other side?
so the end of the result was that when the opportunity came, and I didn't recognize it for what it was a guy came on the depot division, which is they send people for retraining, but it turned out he'd been the radio operator on this mounted police vessel that went into the Arctic. I thought, gee whiz, all the things you dream about, there it is. And so I applied to become the radio operator, and the thing I had behind me was I had built radios of my own design, and I had been a ham radio operator, and I could copy code like anybody. And they couldn't find another guy, so I was it.
So here's the boy from the prairies going out to sea.
Well, kind of. And so my training in the mounted police, although it was not necessarily intended to be involved with this kind of a thing, was probably the best they had at the time. Here's a guy that can fix a radio, and he can build the whole thing, you know. I'm familiar with radio transmitters, and I'd done quite a bit of reading. I didn't expect anything as ancient as they had here. But I was probably good training for the job I was going to get. Now, other things they didn't tell us. The oldest radio transmitter I have ever seen was on this boat. And when you first walked in the radio cabin, it just looked like a big wire cage. And up on the top was this big 10-inch diameter coil that ran all the way across. But here is a Marconi 100 W4C transmitter that the whole stage, the whole transmitter was revolved around this one oscillator that was in this cage with a 10-inch diameter coil, and there's no tuner. You tuned it by adjusting where the clips were in the coil on the top.
Oh, wow.
And it was sensitive enough, because of the size, that when we went from Victoria to Vancouver, you had to retune it because of 15 kilocycles off. It's the oldest radio transmitter I've ever seen, and I suspect maybe it was made to order because I've never seen another one like it. And I could build and have done radio equipment that was better than the stuff they had on the boat. I took a stupid bet one morning in Toronto when we lived there. We were talking with this guy like we are with you, and I don't know what brought it up, but it was around 10 o'clock in the morning, and I bet this guy that I could build a radio and have it playing by midnight. And so I made a diagram of what the radio ought to be, made a parts list from that, got on a streetcar, went downtown and got that, all the parts except for the tin that I had to bend up to make the chassis. And so I got my stuff and went back home and started work. And at 20 minutes to 12, we turned it on and we got music. And needless to say, I felt pretty good about it.
Just in the nick of time.
Well, this guy'd been pretty obnoxious. So,
What was it like every day on the ship? How much work did you have to do, or what was a day like for you?
what time of year?
Well, tell us about the winter, because the winter is probably the hardest time for you, was it?
Well, the days change a lot in the Arctic. You go all the way at, let's say we start the clock at September. Everything's freezing up. And then after that, you get snow and it gets cold. And you get nights when the only illumination is the moon. And the sun is going through its cycle. And so in September you may have a 6-hour day, but by December you have no day. It is dark all day, every day. The brightest time you have is when you have a full moon. And then later on, the Earth goes through its cycle, and the sun, because of the way the Earth circulates relative to the sun, the days get longer. And then the Eskimos start having their dances and fun because it's warm outside. And so you wind up with having, during the day the sun goes down and goes back up. 24-hour day sunshine. And that lasts for about a month. And then it gets a little shorter, and then it's the other way around. The sun peaks its way up over the horizon, less and less, until the sun doesn't come up at all.
So during the dark days of winter, what would you be doing on the ship? Because you were iced in, you were locked into the ice, right?
Well, in a way, I was lucky. When you have nothing to do, it's a terrible burden. And if you're a person that likes to do things, that's another kind of a burden. And the other one is if you are a person like myself that thinks about new things, new uses, or for some reason, then there's no place you can go to get the stuff to do it with. So that's a frustration. But I was lucky in this event that officially, when we were at sea, I was the radio operator. So I had my thing to do, and I'd be on the radio part of the day and sleeping part of the day, and that's all I had to do, was sleep and work. When we tied up in the wintertime, then this situation is strained. But I was the only point of communication for everybody on the ship. And so if you wanted to send a letter to your boyfriend, you want to be careful what you say because it was going to go through me. Okay? But basically, in the summertime, radio conditions were lousy. But in the winter, they were pretty good. And I was radio operator, and officially, at sea, I was a ship radio operator. But once we tied up, that ship at sea was now a mounted police detachment. And my official capacity was the clerk for the detachment. I was responsible for all detachment paperwork. And I mean all of it.
Wow.
And my
If anybody
understanding,
had an investigation or something else happened and it got written up for the police records, I got to do it.
and my understanding was that when the ship was tied up, there was a lot of police work that was being done. People were going out and investigating and doing those sorts of
That
things,
was
right?
when the ship converted from being a ship at sea to a mounted police detachment. Okay? And when it was tied up someplace, it was a mounted police detachment. I was the clerk of the court and had the privilege of writing everything that got written officially by anybody on the boat.
How did you spend your first Christmas?
I'm dreaming. I guess when I was a kid growing up, I had, well, at number one, I was the number one kid. And I had parents that really were very considerate. My mother had been a school teacher, and my dad, he had grown up on a farm and went to live with his uncle because he wanted to be a lawyer and his dad wanted him to be a doctor, and they couldn't get over the fight. So he grew up in Ontario, and that was where he met this nice Scottish school teacher.
But when you were on the ship, how did you spend your Christmas? Your first Christmas on the ship?
Well, first thing is you're in December, and the ship doesn't know the difference. And so how much light you had depended on the phase of the moon. There was no sun, there was no daytime.
Did you celebrate Christmas dinner?
Well, with the cook we had, I would be kind of careful about calling it a celebration.
So the food wasn't very good.
The food was fine, but remember that everything we had on board ship came out of a sack. You're looking at me funny.
People,
They
but
hadn't started canning stuff yet.
right.
There was about, we maybe had 10 cans of stuff for the whole voyage.
So your regular meals would be
So
stuff out of a sack?
whatever we were going to eat, if you could dry it out and put it in a sack, we had it.
Right.
And for that reason, I'm no big fan of tapioca, sago, and rice.
But when during the winter time, was there any opportunity for hunting? I guess it was dark, so you couldn't even do any hunting then.
Well, you got part of it right. When it's winter time, the brightest day you have is when you have a full moon. There is no sunlight. So if you want to go out and go hunting, be my guest. The other thing is that the likely food, if it could be an animal, might be a caribou. But the thing is that from where we were, there was no trees. And most of it, when it was warm enough, was like a swamp. A full-grown tree might be up to your ankle. You have to go south maybe a couple of 100 miles before you get in that grows. And so the chance of there being any grass-eating animal, slim and none. We had maybe, during the time I was there, we had one family of polar bear. 3 of them came along to take and check us out. And one other day there was a lost caribou who became our dinner.
What was, did you have very much interaction with some of the Inuit people while you were on that voyage?
Or the natives,
Yeah.
the population density is very scarce. You have a family, and that family can be a husband and a wife, or whatever the mixture was, but it was a little group of people. And they lived off the land, mostly if they could find a caribou to shoot. In the summer they had a little better understanding. They'd make a skin boat, and the guys would go out and catch the fish and bring it up the high water mark and drop it, and from there the ladies took over.